We'll go ahead and call this meeting, special meeting of the Helena City Commission to order. This is our second sidewalk summit. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
City Manager Burton,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Dean,
Here.
Commissioner Logan,
Here.
Commissioner Reed,
Here.
Commissioner Shirtliff.
Here.
Thank you.
Right. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's efforts to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. So we will just jump straight into our topic for today. And I don't know if Manager Burton is interested in opening it up or go straight to Director Knopke.
Mayor Pro Tem, I think we can go straight to the director and start right off.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Commission. This is our second Sidewalk Summit, and a quick review of our first Sidewalk Summit. We went through the city code, talked about where the sidewalks are to be installed and how they're to be installed. Talked about some funding options, including a sidewalk improvement program that we have right now, which is kind of known as the volunteer sidewalk program. Went through the basics of it, talked about existing city code, and we had some discussion back and forth, and this is to follow up with that. I do have the code at the very end of this PowerPoint if we need to reference it or you want it. It's the last 14 pages, I think. So any questions on the previous one? So the agenda for this one is, what is a sidewalk district? Talk about the advantages, disadvantages, where would we start? Enforcement discussion, talking about increased enforcement, consequences for violations, and overview of potential asset management software. We do have we have about 5 slides of an example of an asset management software that's strictly developed for ADA, so that it's fairly interesting, and then discussion on potential code revisions. So our goals is to improve pedestrian safety and the multimodal opportunities throughout the city of Helena. And I probably should be advancing, but it's not advancing. It increases connectivity, it addresses the deteriorated and missing sidewalks. It brings the existing streets into more compliance with complete streets policy of the city, and identified safety concerns, traffic calming, or other methods. So also, the second major goal is to identify funding for the pedestrian improvements, sidewalk improvement program, a special improvement district, a pedestrian safety improvement funding. And then a third goal is to evaluate city code for revisions for enforcement. Looking to just discuss with you what the commission's expectations are and level of enforcement and process for the enforcement. I'm going to go over the process here and talk about the code, but the code revisions will probably be a next meeting to go through, either with an admin or another summit. So my deputy wouldn't feel left out because he's home on vacation. Right now, this is just a slide from the last time, talking about maintaining the existing program, allocating funding, revise if we didn't want sidewalks everywhere. Obviously, there's revised for the existing program, which could be increased allocated funding or a 50-50 program. And then, if the decision was sidewalks everywhere, then, potential is sidewalk district creation. Would that look like a vote? Would it be a protest period? And then obviously that's where the funding would come out of. And then, do we look at it all properties equally or all properties equitably? And then process for completion of the sidewalks. And, strategic grid, needs-based, that's where we kind of left the last summit. We did talk about some potentials, and here's some of that discussion. So what would a sidewalk district in Helena look like? Sidewalk districts have some clear advantages. There's clear boundaries and expectations. There's scheduled improvements. It's predictable for residents and for contractors and for the city itself. Disadvantages are, it is another assessment. It's additional costs. What would the sidewalk district include? It would include the missing sidewalks along city streets. It would address ADA ramps. I put a little note in here. What about unimproved streets? So those are, we see those relatively frequently in discussions with the commission on variances or deferrals or waiver of SIDs. And I think that there could be, like we put in here, sidewalks would be excluded, but a waiver of SID signed until the special improvement district is formed to install the complete streets. Along those unimproved streets, do we include them in the sidewalk district? Do we exclude them in the sidewalk district? Those are all considerations for the creation. And then part of what would be included in the district would be, crosswalks, bulb outs, and other safety features that can be included if recommended through the process. So it's all about connectivity and mobility for doing this with sidewalks everywhere. And included with that is those pedestrian crossings, that they are there, they're available, and they're accessible. So that's what we feel that the sidewalk district would look like and include. Obviously, things can be taken, added to and removed, depending on direction. So, where do we start was one of those big questions through this whole process. And after discussing and, some brainstorming sessions, we thought using the schools as our core areas to start with. So we had started the schools and we'd work our way out from those schools. It's a crude depiction over there, but the purple is 2 schools. And, depending on the level of funding per year, this one is contemplating, 3 years, where the purple is the immediate around the schools would be done 1 year. The yellowish area would be the 2nd year. And then the 3rd year would be the blue area. And as you can see, and everybody would know, that you'd start to overlap at some point. And obviously this contemplates larger areas, so the funding may need to increase, but that could be also structured in the way the sidewalk district is created, where you have an initial bout of funding, and then as it builds on itself, it increases. But it also, there's sidewalks in Helena. Some of them have some issues, some of them don't. But as we go through these areas, you wouldn't be completing sidewalks in front of every house. So it would just have to be strategically looked at on how those squares or circles or ovals looked moving forward through the program.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Director Knappe. The approach of starting with the schools makes some sense. What do you see as the relationship between that approach and the possibility of the grant fundings for safe routes for schools, if any?
Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, I see, the safe routes to school originally and still does identify those routes that school age kids take to get to and from school. And some of them showed, basically cardinal points where one route from the north, east, and south and west. Some basically had every route that was conceivable in there. But moving forward with a plan like this, we would systematically start at the schools where there's the highest concentration of pedestrian activity, whether it's kids getting dropped off or kids going to play at the equipment. And as we move out, get into those neighborhoods, we would start connecting those. It actually goes fairly fast when you put all the schools on the map. There is one little area that does get kind of left out, that doesn't have a school nearby, that we would have to address differently, but still we could just place a note there and start there and just work our way. And so I don't know if I answered your question, how the relationship, because we would just be working our way block by block out from the school, whereas the safe routes to school shows the routes that kids take. And that is, you know, along those blocks that we would be working on.
But I guess part of my question was, what would be the relationship between a sidewalk district and applying for grants from Safe Routes for Schools for those corridors? Is there any issue with that, or?
I don't believe so, because we would be directly tying it to the school district and they would be a partner in this.
Yep, thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yep, Commissioner.
Mr. Knopke, so in the picture where you, what does that lower right picture represent?
The lower right, Mary Pro Tem and Commissioners, the lower right depicts two schools. So Broadwater and C.R. Anderson. And the purple would be like a first year project where we did the immediate area around the school, maybe a block out. And then the next color would be the next year. It would just show, it's just depicting the progression of how quickly the areas would overlap with the school, just the schools in Helena.
Yeah. So that doesn't necessarily represent the boundaries of a district.
No, that just represents two schools within a potential district. And
So what would the boundaries of a district look like?
so the boundaries, if the action moving forward with sidewalks everywhere would be the limits of the city limits. Now, obviously, there's some areas in the city limits that like the dirt streets and unimproved streets that we would have to figure out how to address, but essentially would be the city limits. But there's also contemplation that you could do multiple districts. You could take it neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, it would be more administrative work, but you could do it neighborhood by neighborhood as well, which would be, you know, more than one district and probably, you know, 10, 15 districts, if you looked at it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, so somebody within, so the city limits in that sidewalk district, if they had a sidewalk presently, would they be assessed?
Mayor Pro Tem and Commission, so that's some of the caveats of the creation of the district. Do we assess existing sidewalks differently than missing sidewalks? Do we just do a flat rate across the district, because the sidewalks are basically a community benefit, not just the sidewalks in front of your house? If you're using the sidewalks, you're using the sidewalks elsewhere. There's multiple ways that we could look at how we assess the district. It would just be the complexity of the creation of the districts that would take, because if we looked at it, if it's only, say, missing sidewalks district, and then there's a maintenance district, those are two very different things. You know, what we have contemplated is either one or a few larger districts that would be a flat rate that would basically get the sidewalks installed during a period of time. And then that assessment would either sunset, or if during the creation of the district, it was contemplated to be in there as a maintenance district, so that as deteriorated sidewalks or tree roots or tree removal to fix the tree root problems with the sidewalks came up, those costs could be borne by the district and not the adjacent property owner.
Okay. stop for now.
I might ask a quick question. I was gonna wait, but it's building off this. Is it, I don't know what the math would look like, but would it be possible to say we're working on these two areas and we're going to create a district for a 3-year period of time for this one specific area to do their sidewalks, and then that district comes to an end and they maybe transition into a maintenance district. And then we say, okay, now Hawthorne and Central are up. They get their own districts, and then once all those sidewalks are complete, they transition into a maintenance district.
Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, the possibilities are really endless on how we do this. I mean, it could be tied back to Commissioner Reed's question on how does it interact with safe routes to school. We complete a safe routes to school plan, which with prioritized areas or prioritized routes. And yes, you could prioritize it by school or neighborhood and complete those, you know, in the 3 to 5 year time frame or whatever, then move on to the next district. Again, this is just contemplating that, you know, the commission said we want sidewalks everywhere with one district. What would that look like? That's how we would start, but there's endless possibilities on how a district could be formed, how big they are, and what requirements are within them. Like we talked about, missing sidewalks versus existing versus, you know, maintenance.
Okay, great.
Mayor Pro
Yeah,
Tem.
go ahead.
I do. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Director Kanopki, thank you very much. I've had some conversations with folks in the community about sidewalks and also on the non-motorized transportation advisory board. And unfortunately, we can't be here tonight, but you know, we've talked a lot about safe routes to schools, and I look at the district and I know that I live right across the street from one of these schools, and I've dropped off kids to CR Anderson. I know that the sidewalks are needed, but I worry about sidewalks just in a few blocks radius versus all the way up to say Henderson. But also too, I worry about the folks who have existing sidewalks that feel penalized for having a sidewalk. And I think that's part of the reason why the price of it and then the maintenance of it cost altogether feels like a penalized, and that's kind of why we almost have a patchwork. That's just my understanding why we have a patchwork of sidewalks, and wanted to see if we did do a district, what the cost per homeowner or landowner or property owner would be.
Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners. Unfortunately, we don't have an exact inventory because of the weather came up on us when we were starting that. So part of the presentation at the end of that ADA software, that there are consultants, companies out there that can drive our city streets like we do for our PCI, for our asphalt evaluation, that can drive the streets and pick up the sidewalks, actually pick up trip hazards, 1/4-inch trip hazards with their LiDAR data, and basically come out with an entire report as of that snapshot of that day or those days of how much sidewalk do you have, how much is missing, how much is compliant, how much is non-compliant, your ADA ramps, your signs, anything that affects those ADA components of sidewalks, it records and brings up into this very nice display. Like I said, when we get there, we can point some of that out, but to your point is we would need an inventory like that. So we could determine what we had in the city, what was compliant, what's not compliant, because we have a lot of sidewalks in the city. You know, due to age or trees or, you know, whatever, there are some that are not in the best of shape. There are some that are in great shape. There we have ADA ramps that, you know, have the cast iron truncated domes. We have those that have the plastic domes. We have depressed curbs. We have no curbing for that ADA access. So again, I think moving forward with any district that we discuss, whether it's one or multiple, it would be how to structure it and what attributes we put into that district and how we address them. I mean, if we had that snapshot in time, we could say at this date and time, this is who, this is what we think is going to be assessed, what's not assessed, or this. You could break it up into bits and pieces of, well, the ones that have sidewalks would be part of the maintenance side of it. And then the missing would be part of the, the sidewalk side of it. So there's multiple ways.
Manager Burton, and then we do have your deputy / graphic designer with his hands up. And so we'll go to him after Manager Burton.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. And Commissioner, one way to look at it is, as we reviewed our capital improvement plans, we talk about knowing what we own, what condition it's in, and then those improvements tied to a plan. And when we look and it's a utility, public utility, just like the water system. And then once you have that understanding, then you can back into financial approaches and analyze that relative to options. But we have an integrated system of streets throughout the city. They're not all in the same condition, but they are all in that plan, and we understand what condition that utility's in, which helps us decide how to apply limited public resources to the continual improvement and maintenance. Thank you.
Mr. Cooey.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to comment on the question about could we do the sort of specific area for a couple of years? The cautionary part of that is the smaller we make these districts and the shorter time frame, the higher that assessment would be for those residents. The benefit of having a larger district over a larger period of time is that it would help alleviate the burden of that annual cost of the assessment. So even if we were to approach it in a sort of systematic time frame, the larger district would make it so that assessment would be a little more affordable every year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This is a comment. I know we're not done with the presentation yet, but I'm slightly concerned that we look at it. If we look at lots and lots of little districts, we're sort of taking away the accessibility angle of the conversation. For people who rely on sidewalks for accessibility, if we have lots of little districts and some do it and some don't, you find yourself in a position of not being able to access certain parts of the community. So I would say as we move forward, if we can just bear in mind, I understand the concerns about what might be described as penalizing people who have sidewalks. I wouldn't put it that way. I would say it is increasing access for people who have no other way to move through our community. Thanks.
We'll do public comment once the presentation's over and then take a public comment from everyone. Great. Director Kanofsky.
So, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, there are, other funding scenarios. There's, as we talked about special improvement districts, there's several grants out there. I just named a couple, the Transportation Alternatives Grant, the Community Area Block Grants. Right now, there's a lot of grants tied to connectivity and sidewalks. The point of the grants are they're all competitive, and they would require submitting for those every year. So the notion of having those funds every year would be contingent upon getting awarded those grants. So the constant or the funding of it would be, I guess, in flux from year to year if we chose to go that way versus something that provided a more dedicated funding alternative. So we've already talked about the multiple districts and single districts. Again, there's a ton of ways that we can look at that, maintenance versus missing sidewalks versus existing sidewalks. So we won't go over that. again, so potential process to create a district. These are just some high level looks at what would need to be done in the immediate needs, short term and long term. So immediate needs, out to about 18 months, we need to determine FY24 funding for the interim sidewalk improvement program. Additional discussions with recommendations and or guidance. Determine method of implementation, public engagement. That all would be part of putting together the safe routes to school plan and identifying those priorities. So if we went to the route of multiple districts, which was the best and the higher need, and starting there. And detailed inventory conducted using LIDAR or other methods. So as managed burden, if we need to know exactly what we have on the ground right now, so that we can move forward with, we might have a large portion of sidewalks, but a good portion of those may be deteriorated or have trip hazards or whatever. So you would almost lump those into maintenance sites, that those will be fixed on a more immediate need. Short term, approval of a funding approach. Short term would be 18 months or out to about 2 or 3 years. Approval received, continue with the formation of a district or whatever funding strategy we have, and refine the costs and schedules associated with those, either multiple districts or whatever method we chose. And then long term is, if a district or other method is approved, we implement by the plan that was proposed. We monitor the costs of the implementation and make sure that the things that were said that were going to be done are getting done in an efficient manner with those monies. Any questions on that slide?
Don't pause too long. We'll hit one.
So I'm going to switch from the funding scenario. So that's why I was asking questions into the enforcement side of it. We did call around to some cities, Butte, Livingston, Great Falls, Whitefish. They all do a similar complaint driven process for trip hazards, sidewalk obstructions that we do. Great Falls is more similar to they have a 7-step method that they follow, which is really similar to ours. So in the interest of time, the big ones that we found that were of interest for some of this enforcement that we've been having reoccurring issues with was Great Falls for blocking sidewalks, trash cans, whatever. They immediately removed the blockage and then sent a bill to the adjacent property owner. That involved knocking on the door, of course, and seeing if somebody was home to see if they would mitigate the process, the concern. But in recent years, they've moved away from that punitive, as they classified it, to more educational compliance model, to where they're working more with the property owners to try to alleviate this. I think they go hand in hand. I think that there is an educational component, because I don't think everybody fully understands or appreciates what an obstacle is, that can be an obstacle. I mean, people run a hose across the sidewalk, and it's really not a thought that might be an obstacle for somebody, but somebody in a wheelchair, that is an obstacle, because it can potentially cause them to flip or just not be able to get over, depending on the size of the hose. We couldn't get a hold of to see, but Whitefish has an almost zero tolerance policy for ADA. We're researching that to see what that really means. So in the light of enforcement, we reach out to the property owners, we make contact, we knock on the doors, and a lot of times the situation is resolved immediately. After some education, we didn't realize, but we do have Unfortunately, we have repeat offenders for some of these sidewalk obstructions, encroaching on sidewalks. Some just don't respond to our letters, so that's where some of this, maybe talking, going a step further on the enforcement side, to help alleviate some of these issues. So this is a proposed ability compliance process. So we're proposing to move all those service requests that we currently have that would be deemed mobility, like the trip hazards, the sidewalk obstructions, the snow removal. We had moved those into a different category under mobility compliance so that we could better track those on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis. So this does revise our current policy of reaching out, but some of these mobility concerns, I think, are a little bit more of immediate need than some other things that we may have. So in this, I'll just run through this really quick. Within 24 hours of a service request, code enforcement would review and inspect the concern. If no violation is found, the complainant would be notified if they had if the contact information was provided. That is one of our struggles, is some of the service requests that we receive are anonymous, so we can't reconnect SAC with those folks to tell them, what we found or what we did or what have you. But if there was a violation, then within 24 hours of the inspection, a notice would be sent out. Part of the inspection would be that we would contact or knock on the door of that residence to see if we could mitigate that right away. Have that educational time with them to explain why, whatever they had there was an obstruction or what have you. So then, yeah, we send out the notice. If the property owner remedies the concern, then we allow them to do their mitigation within the time frame that's been mutually agreed upon. That's one of the things that I guess we would welcome input on, is that if it's reconstructing their sidewalks because they're all deteriorated, do you give them 30 days? Do you give them 45 days? Do you give them 60 days? What is that time frame that is reasonable? Because obviously there's a concern out there. So within 5 days of the first notice, if we haven't received a response, then the final notice would be mailed. And then if no response is received after the final notice, if in this case, in this scenario that we're talking about here, was a sidewalk panel or panels that needed to be replaced, we would hire a contractor or have the contractor already under contract and give them a task order to go fix those panels or whatever the deficiency was, and then they would have 30 days, depending on the size or less, to fix that or mitigate that concern. And then after that, we would inspect it once they told us it was mitigated, and then verify billing. We would invoice the property owner, and then if no payment, just like with our snow removal or whatever, that we would bring it forward for the commission to add it to the. Obviously, this is a very Hubble telescope general overview, so there would be times for a contact and discussion with the property owner. There'd be appeals that if they didn't believe that they were in violation or didn't agree with the cost, there would be an appeal process. And then all along this whole process, if it was needed, we would be able to have a discussion with the ADA coordinator to meet with the property owner, roadway code enforcement, and everybody to really sit down and discuss what the issues were. But recently, within the past few years, we have really found that the majority of people, once we make contact and explain to them what the issue is, they usually mitigate it fairly quickly. It's usually when there's a price tag of rebuilding all their sidewalks or whatever. That's when we get pause from them, because obviously nobody's looking to put out $6,000 for a sidewalk on the spot. So I think there's some details in here that would be gone through to have those discussions and working with the adjacent property owners to mitigate the situations. So, and on top of this, do we extend that enforcement arm to, would the commission want to issue fines? Right now, if you park on the sidewalk, Helena Police can issue a $25 parking fine because you're not supposed to park on the sidewalk. But it doesn't address repeat offenders of, blocking a sidewalk with their garbage can or what have you, or not installing. We have methods to do that. It's just that, would the commission wanted to look at revising those codes to, right now, it's just, if it gets ordered in, the sidewalks get done, the bill is sent, and then, it gets put on, either paid or put on their property taxes. Again, there's a lot of solutions that you could put in there, leave it the same, add a different program that met with some of those more immediate needs, what have you, so.
There are questions? Commissioner?
Thank you. Director Knopke, you had mentioned a slide back about our neighboring communities in Whitefish Butte, Great Falls, etc. You talked about the enforcement part, but do we know examples of how they're funding theirs? Do they have districts or a district? What are some best practices that we could learn from them? But I was just curious to see how Butte, Livingston, Great Falls, and Whitefish do theirs.
So Mayor Pro Tem and Commission, sorry for skipping that. Livingston has an ADA transition plan. And they offer their property owners through an urban renewal agency, a 50-50 plan with a 6% interest rate. And that's just it's a 50-50 split with a urban renewal agency. So the city pays 50%, the homeowner pays 50% on a 6% interest. And then that program, you have to apply for it. It would be just like, not just like, but it would be similar to applying for the sidewalk program or the solar program here in the city. As far as the other ones, they don't offer a lot of programs. Some of them have a sidewalk program like ours, and it's very similar. It's the city fronts money at an interest rate, and then the homeowner pays it off over a number of years. And right now, our terms is 10 years at 0% interest.
No questions? Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Director Knopke. So the programs you were just talking about are related to enforcement, but do they have sidewalk districts in those communities generally?
Missoula, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, Missoula has a sidewalk district. And it just, every sidewalk district is pretty similar. Some of them target multiple areas. But typically what you see is at some point in time, they determined that this was going to be the starting point, and they just march their way, whether it's 2 blocks at a time or 40 blocks at a time, depending on the city size. And they just march their way across the city to fill in those immediate needs. But that's where these safe routes to school and other plans would help inform where those immediate needs would be. And you could start at the schools again, but also address those immediate needs in the first couple of years, so that those crucial corridors that may not get there for the next 4 or 5 years could get upgraded initially instead of waiting.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Commissioner Logan?
I've got quite a few questions. I don't know if this is the place
for them or not, it seems like we've got a ways to go yet. For example, what's the total need of sidewalks? How much is that going to cost? How do you spread those assessments if you assess them, and what's that mean to the average homeowner? And as you probably know, one of the areas that I'm going to struggle with the district concept is, whether what we're doing is a true assessment or a tax. And this is something that comes up in my mind quite a bit. And I just would like to read something that sort of explains my struggle with it, if I can find it. So in the spring of 2018, a new program was proposed in the city of Helena, and the city attorney was making a presentation to the commission about the potential program. And he opened it up, and I've probably read this before, but the question is not, for me, been satisfactorily answered. So he's talking about this program would be funded through an assessment of a flat fee on properties that may potentially use the program. To determine the applicable legal requirements, it is important to determine whether such a fee would be considered a tax or an assessment. This distinction is important because if the proposed fee is deemed to be a tax, then the city is required to put the proposed fee up for an election. At the time, the city had reached its allowable maximum number of mills. But he goes on to say, he says, to summarize this discussion, that he was going to present, a tax is generally any fee imposed to collect revenue to fund general government operations. An assessment is any fee that is imposed to offset the cost of a special benefit provided to a particular piece of property that is not shared by the general taxpayer and which is commensurate with the cost of any benefit. So, we create this district and then we begin assessing properties. I'm assuming a flat fee based on square footage and those sorts of standard approaches to districts. But if a property doesn't in any way benefit, I've always struggled with how do you assess? Then if they don't benefit, then you're getting into a tax. And so I think the question is something that's going to need to be answered for me in terms of a district is as the city attorney at the time said, the applicable legal requirements. The other struggle that I'm having right at this moment is, and I think I said this at the very first meeting that we had this year, was so we, clearly great need here, and it's, going to have, it's going to cost a lot, but we also have many other needs that have been addressed over the last couple of years. And so I think, before moving forward, I think we kind of, as a commission, have to sort of prioritize we have to prioritize all those needs. And so that's, I guess, what I'm looking at is, as we're moving forward, I don't really feel like I could comfortably say, let's move forward, let's do the district. Because I don't know what that is, and don't know what it means to, I'm assuming it's both residential and commercial. And which is another reason that whether it's a tax or an assessment is important, because we have any number of tax exempt properties within our city, and so are we taxing them, or is this a true assessment? If it's a tax, we can't really tax exempt properties. So there's just a lot of questions that I think need to be answered, I guess, so.
Manager Burton.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. I think the approach that we're taking, and obviously we're not asking for any decisions today. But as we walk down the road, I mean, and we've talked in other arenas about a 5-step process of identifying a problem, defining it, looking at your options, selecting the option, and then implementing, monitoring, and adjust. And I think in terms of that approach, we're kind of still at the definition stage. And so there's a lot of homework to do. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we're staying informed and getting direction in terms of why don't you look at this? And then we'll reconvene at a future date to show you what we've found relative to defining it. Clearly, one of the next steps is a clear inventory of what we own, what condition it's in, and trying to establish an associated cost to do repair and improvements where no sidewalks exist. And with that type of analysis, then I think that you can look at, okay, based on that need, what organizationally exists to put together a citywide sidewalk district? Is it vetted legally? Is it a tax or a fee? And what time frame would it take to build that system out? And so I think we're at the front end of the process. And through all of these discussions, any direction that we, or any analysis that we haven't talked about that you're interested in, that's going to help us more focus that staff work as we build up to the next discussion.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Going back to the enforcement, before we move off of that conversation, I would be supportive of considering moving towards more enforcement, any enforcement of some of these violations, including a discussion about fines as needed. I think the process that you laid out looks quite comprehensive, but still takes a long time. And again, in the interest of people in our community who are faced with accessibility challenges, I think moving towards a system where enforcement is encouraged a bit more strongly might help address some of the persistent offenses that we see over and over and over again that simply are not changing. So I would be very supportive of moving forward, trying out a new system. If code needs to be revised to allow for enforcement of these things, I would be supportive of that. And I don't know what that process looks like, but I would like to hear more about how we would move forward on that. Thank you.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I would just add to the context that there are sidewalks that have been put in and then variances provided where sidewalks don't exist. And when you look at, for instance, Director Konopka had Great Falls up there. Very few areas where they had a variance in Great Falls. And then the ordinance is much like the City of Helena, is that if you don't have a sidewalk, we can order it in. And we have that ordinance. And if it's not in good repair, you have to fix it as well. And I think that, you know, that's been on the books forever. And what we're looking at is, obviously, those tools aren't going to get us to where we need to go in terms of sidewalks throughout the city, which brings about this approach and process.
So I might make a couple comments, and we are going to get to public comment after the commission discussion and then once the presentation is wrapped up. So I've seen a couple of hands online too, so I just want to make sure everyone knows that. Couple things that it would be really helpful if we get some of the code enforcement data. And which of those are repeat offenders? Because if, you know, with 5 residences or 25 residences, I think that that's an important distinction. The other piece that I think deserves some conversation, and Director Konopka brought this up, for those that do have a violation and the reasonable time frame in terms of getting it resolved. I know that we've come up against this in the past, where we have a huge backlog of those who are trying to access the sidewalk loan program. So say you have a violation, you want to get it fixed. Do they jump to the front of the line for the sidewalk loan program? And then I know last year the contractor availability was a huge piece of it too, because we just simply don't have the contractors, I think, to meet the need, from what I understand that we've had. Given the budget that we've given, I think if we said, here's 5 million, we don't have an extra $5 million. I'm just putting in an absurd number out there. Here's $5 million in this fund for the sidewalk loan program. Then we probably would get contractors who said, yeah, we'll do it for you. So can you comment on that, and then maybe what that looks like moving forward?
So Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, yes, our next discussion or an update to this meeting, I can give the code enforcement numbers to date. As far as the current sidewalk improvement program, we're currently out to bid right now to select a contractor, and then we'll open up that program. If memory serves, the ordinance for the sidewalk improvement program is basically anybody that writes and applies and agrees to it can be a part of that program. Whether we make that first come, first serve, or we reserve some money aside so that if we do have outstanding deficiencies, that they could be, put on the list and use that program. Or if we just say that if there are outstanding deficiencies and from the previous year, that they'll sign on, or we order them onto the program, then we can see what's left. The first couple of years, I'm going to say, are probably going to be a lot of just doing those ones that are on the books versus new sidewalks. But that doesn't preclude the conversation of increasing that funding of that program, or other methods. So I think there's a way to get them in front of the line without impacting. We just might have to have a funding discussion of how much.
I think that might be helpful heading into the budget conversation of how much what is the dollar amount to eliminate that backlog, and then at what point does it actually start? I mean, it doesn't rotate very quickly when we charge 0% interest, but we also charge 0% interest so that it's accessible to everyone, and we're encouraging people to fix their sidewalks and install sidewalks. So I think having those numbers will be helpful heading into the budget discussions, because I think that regardless of what we do next, it's not happening overnight. And I think that's a really important bridge program until we figure out what's this next step of the whether it's a district or something else. Hey, any other comment? Yes,
Mayor
Commissioner
Pro
Logan.
Tem, Commissioner Reed commented on the enforcement piece of it, and I tend to agree with what she said, although I just want to share this anecdote that I think Commissioner Dean was received feedback on this one that will sort of exemplify the challenge to hard and fast enforcement. Was a property that was on the west side, completely surrounded on all four sides by sidewalks, and received a complaint. And then shortly thereafter, they received a letter, I believe that I think it was 30, 60 days, something like that. You need to fix it. And this was probably at a time, I think, well, for one thing, it was a significant amount of money to get that in compliance. And the difficulty with finding contractors to do it. And So, it can be, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you, it can be very challenging to make some properties come into compliance. So
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioner Logan. Just to clarify, when I'm talking about enforcement, I'm talking about not just the sidewalk issues, it's all of the, trip hazards and impediments and blocking things with signs and, parking cars that are hanging over onto the sidewalk. I mean, the breadth of enforcement in addition to sidewalks, which I get is a significant piece, but not the only piece, because again, there are as the commission representative to the ADA committee, I have been hearing for quite some time about any number of impediments to accessibility that you can see some of in the pictures right there, snow removal, cars, etc. And currently our enforcement of those infractions is not as robust as it could be. So I would support looking into enforcing all of our various code violations, including sidewalks.
Director?
And Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. That's encouraging, but we would start with the, education, and we would work our way through. In some of those circumstances where somebody left their garbage can in the middle of the sidewalk and we got a complaint upon it, that would probably be something where the code enforcement officer would just move it onto the grass or to get it and leave a note for them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them that we can't address immediately, but I think if we proceed thoughtfully and think about some of these requests that we get, there are things that we can do proactively. There's things that we can do through education programs where we send out flyers just like we do in the utility inserts. Did you know that this causes a barrier for some type thing, so that we make the community more aware, and hopefully that will impact the community more than just, sending letters or finding people that obviously we're always going to have some percentage of the population that it's going to require certain number of techniques, but I mean, I think it's a stepped approach so that we can work with the community, work from all aspects. And these are some recent examples of requests that we've had. Some of these are easily mitigated, like the one in the upper left. Parking bumpers for parking lots. I mean, that's an easy mitigation strategy for that one. The snow pile you can't really see it there, but it's in an ADA spot. That was done by a private contractor. And again, I think that's some education that we reach out to these snow removal companies and just educate them on the city code, educate them on these things that we see, like plowing snow out to the right of way. I saw that in 3 instances on the way over here. Which there's some places I'll agree that they don't have any snow storage, so that does happen. But I think a lot of these are just once we educate the companies I think a lot of these will fix themselves. I don't think it's going to be, but I do think that there is a need for a little bit more robust enforcement.
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Director Knopke, what is the current status of the sidewalk improvement program fund? Do you know how much money is in there right now?
Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners, so we typically budget $150,000 of the fiscal year. Right now, there is some money left over, but those are typically, by the time the budget gets passed in July, the contractor that has it for that next year can get some of the sidewalks done in that summer, fall, and then it carries over into the spring and summer, and then we get the next allocation of money. So I can't tell you exactly how much is in there right now, but we are out right now. The bid opening is coming up here soon for that contractor. And once we get those prices, so we know how much it's going to cost, we'll open up the sidewalk program so that when people call and we go out and give them an estimate, we have the cost that's gonna be associated with the sidewalks.
On that note, will the folks who have been on, so we kind of made some adjustments at the beginning of last year's season. For the folks that applied last year, or I guess maybe that was a year and a half ago. Who are in the pipeline but have not gotten their sidewalks yet, they do not need to reapply again, is that correct?
Mayor Pro Tem commissioners, no, that's not. We switched to the, when we open up the program, as they come and sign on to the program and they sign the estimate.
Yep.
Then they're into the program. And then we only signed enough estimates up to the amount of money that we had available, because we don't ever know how much, when we're gonna have the next extra funding.
Okay, so if they were waiting for their estimate but they hadn't yet come to do the estimate, they need to reapply.
Yes.
Okay. I have someone in particular in mind that I will need to pass that on to.
And Mayor Pro Tem and commissioners, that, the conversation is that we need to look at having a portion of the funds or increase the funding so that we can get those. Because I can tell you, I know of 10 properties right now off the top of my head that need to have their sidewalks repaired that have ignored the letters. That we set that money aside and get those sidewalks done and completed, then we can definitely have that discussion and recommend increased funding so that we can get those taken care of. But coming forward, I will get those outstanding sidewalk complaint or sidewalk issues, installation issues. And we'll try to put a number of costs to those for our next discussion, and then also the code enforcement numbers for sidewalk and mobility concerns, complaints.
All right, so with that, we will move to public comment. We will follow the mayor's 2-minute standard. I don't know if Alex, you have our.
Do I just remove this so the camera can pick it up? There's.
Well, thanks for letting me speak. I'm George McCauley. I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. I've worked with many of y'all through the years since the time of Greta. And I lobbied for to change our enforcement policy. It's really impotent, because our code enforcement officers under David do a magnificent job, but they can only do what y'all allow them to do. And that means, please shovel your sidewalk, please move your car, please don't put your yard sale on the sidewalk. They can't make you do anything. So many of y'all know that I and many other people have turned in the same people. I've been doing it now for, who knows, 12 years, the same people. So let's do the thing that makes our code enforcement officers have some power and issue fines to those people who continue to thumb their nose at our city. And it's for the benefit of not just our disabled community, but for those of us who are able-bodied as well. Thank y'all very much.
I'm very impressed, Mr. Crowley. Next public comment.
So, is it on? You guys can hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
It's more for the people online.
Sure. So for the record, my name is Joel Peden. I am a disability rights advocate here in Helena, and know many of you, but there are also many that I don't. So first of all, I do want to object to the 2 minutes, because you guys took an hour to ask your questions and discuss. So I really feel like, limiting this conversation to 2 minutes diminishes the role that people that are directly affected by what's going on with our sidewalks. And it's actually a little insulting. I gotta say that. Just so you know, I was late because, and I'm not going to abide by the 2-minute thing, just so you know. If you want to arrest me, that's fine, but that'll be fun to watch. Prior to this, I was lobbying up on up at the Capitol on a parking bill, right? Accessible parking language. Finished that, had to wait 35 minutes for a bus to bring me here. Which, so that, and then to be able to come here and make that effort to show up, to share my experiences and to share my ideas, and then be told, 2 minutes. That's just, like I say, it's insulting. You want to know why people in the disability community have stopped trying to be part of the system? This is exactly why they have stopped trying to be part of the system, because over and over and over again, it's like inviting us to your house for Thanksgiving dinner and putting our card table out on the front porch while you guys are inside discussing. And the only way that we can communicate is to try to yell through the screen door saying, hey, we have some great ideas and we believe in nothing about us without us. So you need to listen and you need to make us part of the process. I don't know how you actually put people on this, put people at the table that this affects directly. But we are the experts in our lives. During the spring, summer, and fall, I'll put anywhere between 60 and 100 miles a week on my chair. All right. This is going to be, I believe, and David would have to check the date of my complaint. I believe this is going to be the 5th summer after I filed a complaint on 11th Street that went from Walgreens to Cruz. When they did the initial assessment, and it's been so long, my memory's not as good as it used to be, but I believe there was 46 or 47 violations just on the north side of the street. Most people fix them. The folks, the ones that are the most dangerous have not been touched. 5 years coming up on. Until you, as an administration, and the city starts treating sidewalks like we do streets, it's not going to change. Right? So there's one area on 11th, doesn't take very much to be able to find it. The bulge in the sidewalk's got to be a good 4 to 5 inches right now. And it's been like that. All right. I always say, hey, if there was a buckle in a street that was a foot high, how long would it take, David, before we had a crew out there trying to fix it? Would we have an excuse we can't fix it because we can't find a contractor? Would we have an excuse we can't fix it because we didn't put enough money in the budget? I'm guessing it would be fixed same day. That's the expectation that I have. I pay taxes, right? I don't drive because you don't want to give a blind guy a driver's license. Okay. I opt to use my chair as my transportation. And there are places I have, again, this will be the 5th summer where I have had to make the choice that is safer for me to ride my chair down 11th Street than it is for me to go on the sidewalk. It's safer for me to ride down 11th Street and battle the traffic than it is to use the sidewalk. How do we justify that? Now, I'm all for long-term planning, right? We need to do that. But guess what? This stuff isn't brand new, right? There was a comment earlier, and God bless you, yes, it is expensive. But you guys have gotten off cheap for 30 years. You haven't taken care of that infrastructure for 30 years. And for those of you who don't know, that's when the ADA really came into place. 30 years. Now, we're a patient group, the disability community. But at some point, we need to stand up and say, enough is enough. We want to live in a community that wants us to be here. We don't want to live in a community that says, yeah, we can't get to it for this reason. We don't actually know why we haven't replaced the sidewalk. Last summer, they replaced the curb cut on the corner by this residence I was telling you about. It's only like 4 sidewalk sections to go to replace that trip hazard. Why was it not fixed then? You had a contractor there. You had the concrete there. You had the form guys there. But it wasn't important enough to make the change and to fix it. So that me and anybody else who's walking, there's no way a senior using a walker or anything like that is going to be able to use that part of the sidewalk. What if they have to go to Walgreens to pick up a prescription because it's only 3 blocks away? How are they going to do it? How about somebody blind who uses a red and white cane for orientation and mobility? Now, you guys aren't responsible for what happened in the past. I give you that. But you are responsible for what happens tomorrow. It's not always about planning for what happens 3-4 years and we have great ideas and we try to figure it out. The priority needs to be, let's make safe what we have. Let's do it with expedience and make me feel like you want me to live in this community. Make me feel like you want me to be here. Because there are many times where I question whether Helena is the place I should be or not.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel.
Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Gina Lytle. I am the Vice Chair of the City of Helena ADA Compliance Commission, and I wasn't even invited to be here by anybody from the city. Somebody from the community asked me to be here, and I was happy that I came. And I'd like to say that I've been sending emails. Can you help me, George? That's going to fall out again. I've been sending emails to the City of Helena since I moved here in 2018. I grew up in Helena. This is my home. This is where I went to school, Hawthorne, CR, Capital. I know it inside and out. Since I've moved here in 2018, I've taken my wheelchair and I've traveled your streets like Joel Peden over here. And I can tell you firsthand, lived experience, what your sidewalks are like and what the schools and the sidewalks are like and how I can't navigate around them safely, that I find myself in the street many times. And people are probably looking at me going, gosh, there's a wheelchair and there's a perfectly good sidewalk. And this is on Helena Avenue, going right by Helena Middle School. And I'm in the middle of the street because I can't access the sidewalk. There's no curb cut. There's barriers put in front of their actual parking barriers that you would have in a parking lot to keep me from entering, accessing the sidewalk. There's so much that you have to, I broke the equipment that I borrowed from Montec. It's called a Rio Firefly, and it attaches to the front of your wheelchair. And I can take that out in our national parks and out in the wilderness, no problem. But I can't go from my house to downtown Helena. I went to my physical therapy appointment and I bent it. I documented that. I sent the photographs to the City of Helena. I explained, the struggles that I went through just to go from my home to a physical therapy appointment in my manual wheelchair. And I would like to see the City of Helena look at this as universal design, not as meeting ADA minimal requirements. Like, we haven't done that for 30 years. We haven't, we're not gonna do it. If we tell property owners, business owners, governments, municipalities, states, that this is universal design, that this is what's really important, this is for everybody, this is for babies, young people, people in strollers, walkers, blind people, people in wheelchairs, like all of us, old people, my 85-year-old friends, like this snow wasn't stopping them. And we got curb cuts that you guys got mountains of snow in every community in this state. And if we want best practices, go to Big Sky. Big Sky does everything right. All of their curb cuts, their stores, like I can go to events downtown in the town of Big Sky and I can access everything A-OK. Whitefish, they do a great job too. Livingston, I've been there. Missoula, they're trying. Like, they've got some things where they want to make one side of the bridge accessible, but not the other side. So talk to your people that live here. Like, you got to be tough to live in Montana. The winters are long, they're hard. I've seen it snow every month of the year. We call it thunder snow. And I've gone into on Broadway and come out with over 2 inches of them in my car in the middle of August. I think some of you guys have probably been here. So, like, this isn't going away. And I think we need to embrace what we have and celebrate all of our abilities. And gosh, like, we just got, our property owners just got a big refund. Why don't they look at investing in their properties as good for themselves and not seeing it as complying with the ADA? Like, how does that serve anybody? How about we make it great for their grandkids, great for their parents? Because we're closing nursing homes down in this state. 11 recently, and more are closing. And we don't have caregivers. And guess what? People in assisted living homes are being evicted because they have Medicaid. Medicaid. Wisconsin, Montana, my friends in the Beehive. Like, what's going on, people? Communities are here to support each other. We need to support and live with each other and get along and say, hey, I'm not doing this for the guy in the wheelchair, the lady in the wheelchair, the guy that can't see. I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for me, because guess what? I could break my leg. I could have a hip replacement. I could go blind. I could get in a car wreck. God, I could be that girl in the wheelchair. That could be my daughter, my mother. So if we look at it in terms of that, maybe then the city will come. And guess what? I did a video for the city. The city asked me when I moved here to do a spot with them at the garbage can on a sidewalk. And I've never seen it aired, ever. I did it. Like, and you're talking about hiring consultants to come in your community and figure out best practices and, you know, what needs to be done. Wow, you've got 2 experts right here. Like, we live it every day, and you're going to hire somebody to come in and tell you what you need to do when we're dealing with it every day. And I'm on the city 88 compliance committee. Like, could you guys invite me to these meetings? Could you invite our committee? Could you include us? Could we be part of the discussion? Like, I'm embarrassed. And I want to be included. So include me on your future emails, and I'll be here, and I'll bring my friends too. And they have lots of disabilities that are different than mine. And we all have a perspective, and you need to hear it. And I'm really sad to see that we've gone through so many city managers, because we had somebody that was making changes. And that's what we need, is somebody making changes, doing the right thing. Not because the ADA was written 30 years ago, but because it's, you know, it's time. It's now. And people with disabilities, we're really desirable in the workforce. NASA is looking to us, Amazon, everybody wants to do things hands-free. They want to be adaptable. And you know what I've heard, is that it's more marketable to be adaptable than to be smart. So thanks, Helena, for having me, and I hope you take this to heart. And if you need any help, I'm here. I'm an ADA consultant, and I'm willing to work. Thanks. And I'm on your
Thanks, Gina.
committee.
I wasn't going to say anything, but some things moved me today being here. Thanks for George to bring this to our attention at Good Samaritans. And I agree with you for the 2-minute rule, because it feels like you don't really want to hear us. So if that could be taken into consideration, that would be really nice. We hire many, many people with disabilities at Good Samaritans. And as I always say, housing has to be looked at outside the box. Transportation has to be looked outside the box. Your transportation is a wheelchair. Yours is a wheelchair. We have a staff who rides her bike, rain, snow, or shine. This last week, she was walking around with a boot. And I said, what happened to you? She's always on time. She's always at work. She's an interesting person. We just love her to pieces. She says, well, I was riding my bike home and my bike got caught and it slipped on ice. And she was on the street and she's broken a bone in her foot. Her transportation is her bike. So if we can make sure we don't only look at buses for transportation, let's look at transportation for people and their individual needs. So I thank you very much. And Good Samaritan is here all the time to help. One other thing I thought about funding is I used to be on the CTAC committee for transportation. There's money in there for disability needs for transportation. And I wonder if that should be looked at as well. There are 2 different pots of money there. This is a form of transportation. Why couldn't we look at that? So that's it. Thank you.
I ride my bike too, and I'm afraid to go across Montana Avenue. So I don't even access the trails because I don't know how to get from my home in the 6th Ward to the parks here.
Thank
So
you.
thanks for bringing that up.
Any other public comment in the room?
Ma'am, I'm sorry. Would you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, Teresa Ortega. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go online, Madam Clerk.
We do have Wilbur Raymond's hand raised online.
Mr. Raymond.
Thank you, Madam Chair Pro Tem. My name's Wilbur Raymond. I am a volunteer and serve on the Non-Motorized Transportation Advisory Committee. And I would second everything that the disabled community people are saying. It's what we see all the time. But I want to go back to the slide that David put up of the 2 schools, because I think it looks pretty simple when you see it that way, but it's much more complicated, and I'd like to explain why. It'll only take me a couple of minutes. If you can put the slide, David, back up. I can't tell. My screen now only shows my name, so I can't tell if it's up.
It's not at the moment, but I think he's working on it if you want to continue.
All right, there it is. Those 2 schools I'm very familiar with, because the Non-Motorized Transportation Advisory Group did a walk audit down at Broadwater Elementary. And what we discovered is that everybody who lives east of the school has accessible sidewalks from Waukesha up through Peosta to Hollins to Leslie to Wilder, all have sidewalks to the school. West of the school, Broadwater Elementary, we discovered there are no sidewalks in any of those streets currently. And it's been that way since the beginning of Broadwater Elementary. So all the parents who live west of Henderson, who live west of Garfield, their kids are walking in the street to get to school. That's in grade school. The same thing almost totally applies at C.R. Anderson, the second school. We have tried to push the city to get the sidewalks in at Ninth Street, which runs all the way down to Benton, which would give access to all the schools on that upper west side who's have their kids going to C.R. Anderson out of the streets and on the sidewalks. And that's really the problem. It's not that Helena's horrible, it's just that the checkerboard development in Helena from the Barney subdivision on has allowed homeowners not to make sidewalks, not to put in boulevard sidewalks. And so that everybody, we met with the principal of Broadwater Elementary and two people from the Broadwater Elementary Parent Council who went on the walk audit. We walked all the way around Broadwater and assessed each of the intersections for accessibility, safety, etc. And the principal told us that she was appalled at the sidewalk situation around Broadwater. And she fears every day that one of her students is going to be hit by an auto walking on the streets west of the school. So that area on the map around Broadwater, the purple area in the middle, the yellow area and the blue area, everything west of the school has no sidewalks. Everything east of the school does have sidewalks. And so there's a real disparity on the lower west side for parents whose children go to Broadwater Elementary. The same thing occurs up at C.R. Anderson. Now, we've been told that the city is tied up in a lawsuit about the assessments up on that upper west side and that they can't release any of that money yet. I'm not sure where those are. We'd have to check with the city attorney. But I think that Director Konopke has done a great job in promoting safe routes to schools. And I know he believes in the efficiency and in the premium to put on those safe routes to schools. I'm not questioning that at all. We just have to get off the dime and we need to do that. Commissioner Logan, I'm sympathetic on the issue of how we fund this. I lived down on Waukesha, probably 20 years ago when it was still a gravel and dirt street. And we formed a SID down there and had it paved and curbs and gutters put in. So I understand that concept and it makes sense, but you know, these are not simple little squares on a map. That's, you know, both Broadwater parents and C.R. Anderson parents, and I bet we could do the same thing at many other schools. We just haven't gotten around to all of them here with the non-motorized transportation group. Would look a lot like this. I mean, we just need to clean up our act, city. And city commissioners, I hope you'll take seriously that we've got to get our sidewalks installed, and we have to have the curbing and the accessibility addressed on everyone. All those corners around Broadwater School, only 2 of them were accessible. The rest of them, you couldn't get a wheelchair in there if you wanted to. I haven't walked around C.R. Anderson, but I'm guessing that Ninth Street is not a very accessible street. So that's all. I just wanted to let you know, it's not a simple forming a district, etc. We've got to look at each one, each school to find the safe route. And then you folks being the city commission, you need to fund the safe routes to schools. We can't do it. Non-motorized can only suggest to you what we think is important. You guys have to make that decision and follow through on making it happen. That's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. Any other online comment?
I have no further online comment or hands raised at this time.
Great. Really appreciate everyone who provided public comment. It's exactly why we're here. I think that we've spent a long time getting these sidewalk summits moving, so I don't want you to walk away thinking that that's something that's not a priority, because it's exactly why we're having this conversation and having this is our second special meeting to do that. So with that, is there any final comment from the commission before we adjourn?
Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, excuse me.
No,
Go ahead.
you were first.
After you.
No,
Commissioner Reed?
Commissioner Logan was first.
Just a question perhaps for Mr. Burton and Mr. Konopke in terms of funding. We talk about the district. Don't answer this today, but as we look to the future, is there potential in a bond or levy approach? And what might that look like? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I would add on to what Commissioner Logan said. I would be interested for our next conversation to have just an outline of what the options would be, the timelines associated with them, tax versus assessment, levy, bond, what have you, for consideration, because I suspect these things take time, and the sooner we can make some decisions about that, the better. And secondly, I would just say, sort of reflecting on something I said earlier, I would encourage anyone who's watching and anyone on the commission to go out, leave your house for a day. Don't take your car. See how far you get, see how long it takes you, see what you're late to, see where you can't get. Go for a jog if you're able. Count the number of times you jump off the sidewalk because of an obstruction. There is no sidewalk. I've done this a couple of times now. It's eye-opening. And I think it's important when we talk about sidewalks and accessibility that we really understand what it is like in our community for people who do not leave their home in a car and have a perfect sidewalk. I think it is a community-wide issue, and I would encourage everyone to look at it as such. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Commissioner
thank
Shirtless?
you very much. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your comments. I hear you loud and clear. I think when we heard Wilbur Riemann, he and I sit on the same non-motorized transportation committee, and I've been on that for about 7 months. And I live on Hollins Avenue. We don't have a sidewalk in front of our house. The sidewalk ends on our neighbor's house, and we have nothing all the way to the west. And I've seen kids, whether it's Halloween, whether it's going to school, or just walking their dogs, walking through our property, or they're walking on the streets. And the non-motorized group kind of opened my eyes to looking beyond just a vehicle, or looking beyond just walking. There are folks with wheelchairs, strollers, baby carriages, walkers, the canes that you had mentioned, Joel. And looking at, when I mentioned it was too expensive for some homeowners, this current system, I think that's why we have a patchwork, along with variances that have happened where we've kind of given them out saying, no, you don't need one, you're going to have one. I've remained committed to not allowing variances when I make my votes, taking into consideration if there's extenuating circumstances, sure. But if we want to remain a mobile, inclusive, connected, and safe community, I think we're going to need sidewalks. I think that's a part of it, because right now it's a patchwork. It's about 60 or 40%. I can't remember how much of our community has sidewalks. And so what kind of community do we want to be? And, looking at fees, assessments, taxes, et cetera. I think, this is the same argument I think that comes with public schools is, well, I don't have kids that go to that school. How do I benefit? I think, I don't use sidewalks every day. If I do, it's, I do occasionally when I'm walking from, to and from work. I don't have one in front of our house, but to hear your stories, to hear, kind of thinking outside of my own experience and hear your experience. And, there's a lot of folks in your position, whether they choose the bike or they have no other option than a wheelchair. And so looking at what kind of community do you want to be? And yes, we have that patchwork due to being expensive. Well, how does the city, if we want that, how do we as a city pay for that? And so looking at, is it a district where we all pitch in a little bit? Is it multiple districts? I'm interested, and I appreciate Commissioner Reed's comments about, I'd like to see some options. I think that'd be great. But I really appreciate this discussion. And I thank you all for being here today.
Great. Well, we really appreciate everyone making time. I also just want to recognize there are actually quite a few people who do serve on our various advisory committees, and we always appreciate your service. I know Mr. Peden didn't mention this, but he's on the Transportation Coordinating Committee, which is extremely important in a city like Helena, where so many of our main roads are actually MDP roads. And making sure they're at the table to step up as well is very important. So really appreciate everyone being here. I guess this is not the end of the conversation, but I think gathering additional information and figuring out what our actual funding sources look like and how we can leverage them is a good next step, in addition to whether it's via LiDAR or whatever other method, but understanding where the gaps actually are will be very helpful. So I appreciate everyone being here. And with that, we are adjourned.